Salutations, hiker trash. Today we're going to talk about the tent, which is beyond a doubt one of the most important pieces of backpacking gear. So important that it is known as one of the big three, along with the backpack itself and sleep system. And in this hiker's opinion, it may just be the most important of them all. I want to talk about just why the tent is such an important piece of gear, more than you may realize, and ultimately explain why I think no amount of money is enough when it comes to purchasing one. Now, in talking about them, you probably already have a good idea about the tent and why it's important. It's pretty obvious to think about how the tent really is your last, best defense against the elements of nature, for example. But I think we're even taking something for granted there. Most tents out there, I'm talking about the ones you buy at like Target or Walmart, aren't really all that much of a relief from the elements. The cheapest ones are really just privacy pods where you can sleep and put your stuff somewhere other than your car in the dirt. But even past that, the tent's true value, the thing it has every other piece of equipment beat on, is this. The tent gives you a sense of security and familiarity. What do I mean by that? You might be wondering how a thin fabric can possibly keep you safe against wild animals, crazy people, or skinwalkers. Well, the short answer is, obviously, it can't. If a skinwalker decides to have you for dinner, there's nothing you can really do about it. Sorry. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. No, but seriously, your tent is not a magic force field, but it doesn't need to be either. Think about your house, for example. Everybody feels safest when they're in their house. Why? Your house isn't a magic force field. A gentleman with a sledgehammer and a grudge could find his way into your bedroom just as easy as any skinwalker could into your tent. But you still feel safe in your house. Why? Because it's yours. You know its layout. You don't usually have to think when you navigate it. And yes, if a gentleman with a sledgehammer showed up, you know where your weapons are. Or at least you know where to hide. Of every place on planet Earth, you very likely feel safest in your house, or at least safer than most places. And it's the same thing with your tent as well. As far as familiarity goes, it's the same thing. You know how to get cozy in your house better than anyone else. It's warm. It's where all your favorite people and things live. You can go to the bathroom there as long as you like. Okay, maybe that's not the best idea in your tent, but you get the idea. When you go on a major backpacking trip, you are never coming back to where you were, and you have no idea where you're going. I mean, not really. You have a general idea, but normatively speaking, the constant of the trail, the very thrill of it, is the unknown. Sometimes the unknown can suck. You can have the crappiest day on the trail ever, but if at the end of it, you can set up a tent and arrange its contents to your precise specifications, you have yourself a home away from home, and that will do wonders for your psychology. If you were like me, you might be having this thought: what's the cheapest tent I can possibly get for the trail? Well, one of the mistakes aspirant thru hikers make when they get it in their heads that they're going to walk over 1,000 miles on a trail is to skimp on the gear they're going to use. And don't get me wrong, you should be looking out for those sweet, sweet deals. But when it comes to the big three, and that includes the tent, you only want the best deal on the best tent money can buy. Now, that can mean different things depending on the scope of your intended journey, but regardless of the circumstances, you don't want to skimp on the tent. When I was getting ready for my Pacific Crest Trail trip, I went through several tents. The first one I got was a garbage Walmart tent. It must have weighed like 5 pounds and was a nightmarish amalgamation of connected poles and misery. I'll show those snobby ultralighters, I said. I'll make do with my 5-pound tent. And I managed to rip the thing while setting it up in the lawn of my backyard. And maybe that's my fault, but still. After that, I got a lot more high-end products, somewhere around $250 this next tent. Now, that tent was nicer. If I had been maybe on a week-long trip, it would have done me good. But it only took me 2 nights to decide that this tent would not cut it for me either. Even though it was advertised as waterproof, it still leaked on the night it rained, and every time I brushed against it, there came a waterfall of condensation, which felt lovely on that 40-degree night. It was also heavier than I would have desired, and had more of those annoying pulls. So finally I decided to pull all the stops and buy myself a $700 tent, and that was the best money I ever spent. At this very moment, I'm sitting 3 feet away from it, and it still doesn't have so much as a rip on it, despite having a year of days slept in it. Is $700 expensive? Absolutely, especially for a college student. But $700 is not $6,000, which is the amount of money a college student would hope to spend on their apartment over 6 months. According to my calculations, half a year is 182 and a half days. If you divide 700 by that number, you're coming in at just under $4 a day for on-trail living accommodations for a hike like the Pacific Crest Trail. That's not so bad if you think of it in terms of putting all that money up front. I get there are other expenses involved, but we'll handle those in another video. With that $700 tent, you are getting fabric that is robust yet lighter than 2 pounds, netting that will keep you safe against every bug, heat-retaining floor and walls, guy lines and flaps to mix and match to your heart's content, and all in a shelter that can hold up to a torrential downpour and even light snow. Assembly and breakdown can be as quick as 2 minutes, and instead of annoying connector pulls, you could substitute your trekking poles as support beams, and you can fit it all in a space less than the size of a throw pillow. That's not to say that living in a tent is without its difficulties, far from it. The 2 biggest challenges I can think of with concern to tent living are condensation and wind. With regards to the former, I'm not even going to pretend to know the science behind it. Every time I go on a forum or talk with fellow hikers, they all seem to have theories on condensation that contradict each other, and about a million rules for tent pitch and location to prevent it. They're probably all right, and you probably stand to reduce a lot of humidity in your tent by listening to them. The reality of the situation is that you will encounter condensation no matter what you do. Maybe it will be because you don't understand the hydrological sciences like me. More likely, you'll set up your camp, business as usual, and fall prey to some foul weather or act of carelessness. The good news is that most thru-hiker tents are designed to handle dumb hikers, like myself, who wake up in wet tents. They can easily be brushed dry with a towel or dry fabric, or if it's a sunny day, you can put your moist gear out during your lunch to much effect. If you have to crawl into a damp tent the next night, it's not the end of the world if you did your homework with your other gear. Once again, another video. Wind is also annoying. I remember one of my first nights on trail with my tent, the wind saw it fit to wake me up at 2 a.m. for a new day of hiking. I believe most wind can be managed through properly pitching your fancy tent, but once again though, the reality is that after a day of hiking, you might not be so committed to achieving the perfect pitch on a tent, and see no reason in making the perfect the enemy of the good enough. We hikers are far lazier than we boast ourselves to be. A good compromise is to have no flabby parts on either your main shelter or vestibules, and not to camp on top of Mount Wind, but somewhere that lends relief from it. A firm policy of mine when it comes to tents of any kind is, unless you are presently entering or exiting it, to have it zipped at all times. That rule was seared most viscerally into my mind in the jungles of Panama while I watched in horror as my friends found beetles and spiders the size of their fists holding court on and within their sleeping bags. I also once pitched my tent most unwittingly upon a hill of ants, and had the good fortune to have none crawling on me while I broke camp, packed my bag, and promptly huffed it down the trail another 4 miles to a new campsite. If you still need convincing, I know some wonderful mosquitoes who would just love to meet you. I don't want to close without saying at least a few words on the alternatives of sleeping in a tent. There are hammocks, which sound like a scam invented by chiropractors, in my opinion, but which some respectable hippies absolutely swear by. I cannot speak to them as a mainstay shelter, but I would research whether my journey has at least 2 trees at every available campsite, to say nothing of their desirable spacing. They might just be best as a luxury item. I can, however, speak to cowboy camping, which is absolutely delightful. For those who don't know, cowboy camping is to simply lay down a ground sheet and your sleeping bag and have the heavens be your tent canopy. For my part, there is always the enduring fear of being stepped on by something in the middle of the night, so I tend to cowboy camp in those places where that isn't a concern. Otherwise, the experience of beholding the stars without light pollution and noise in some quiet corner of the world evokes the most comforting sensation of feeling at once intimate with the cosmos and most inconsequential to it. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about backpacking or theology, you know where to go.